Pay attention to 16-year-old Maya Ellison. It is 2:03 a.m. on September 14th, 2023, in Cedar Hollow, Ohio, the kind of quiet suburban street where nothing ever seems to happen, where porch lights are off, curtains are drawn, and the night settles in without interruption. A fixed security camera is mounted high on the corner of a two-story brick house, angled downward across a narrow driveway and a stretch of sidewalk, recording everything in a grainy frame, softened by low resolution, colors flattened into a dull green-gray tone, and a digital timestamp flickering in the upper right corner. At exactly 2:03 a.m., the front door opens. A teenage girl steps into view, wearing an oversized, light-colored hoodie, dark shorts, and sneakers, her hair loosely tied back as if done in a hurry. She pauses for a brief moment at the threshold, just long enough to glance back toward the inside of the house before pulling the door closed behind her, though it does not fully latch. There is no visible urgency in her movement, but there is also no hesitation. She walks down the porch steps and toward the edge of the driveway at a steady pace, her hands partially hidden inside the sleeves of her hoodie, her posture relaxed, familiar, as if this is something she has already decided. At 2:04 a.m., a dark sedan enters the frame from the far left, rolling forward slowly with its headlights turned off. The vehicle stops just short of the driveway, engine still running, its interior too dark to reveal the driver. The girl does not wave, does not look around, and does not pause. She walks directly to the passenger side, opens the door, and gets inside. The door closes. The car begins to move again, exiting the frame in the same direction it entered. At the far end of the street, just before disappearing completely, the headlights switch on briefly, and then it is gone. By 2:05 a.m., the street is empty again, and the only visible trace that anything happened is the front door left slightly open behind her. That girl is Maya Ellison, and this is the last confirmed moment she has ever seen alive. Inside the house she left, everything appears undisturbed. Her room is intact, her bed made, a notebook open on her desk filled with unfinished math problems written neatly across the page. Her phone sits on the nightstand, still connected to its charger, which becomes one of the first details investigators focus on, because it means whatever arrangement brought her outside that night did not happen through the device her parents could monitor. Her last known activity comes from a secondary device, which shows a messaging application opened at 1:12 a.m. and closed just a few minutes later, leaving behind no saved messages, no conversation history, nothing except timestamps that confirm communication took place shortly before she left. At 6:40 a.m., her mother notices the front door slightly open. At first, it looks like nothing more than a mistake, something not fully shut the night before, but within minutes, that assumption gives way to something else when she realizes Maya is not in her room and her bed has not been slept in. Calls are made, messages are sent. By mid-morning, concern turns into urgency, and by 10:15 a.m., the situation is no longer treated as routine. The first shift in the investigation comes not from Maya's home, but from a neighbor's security camera 2 houses down. The angle is partially blocked by a tree, but it captures something the original footage does not. The vehicle is already there before Maya steps outside. At 2:01 a.m., the dark sedan is visible at the edge of the frame, engine running, waiting in place for over 2 minutes before Maya exits her house. That detail changes everything, because it establishes that the car did not arrive randomly. It was there in advance, positioned deliberately, waiting specifically for her. Traffic cameras within a 2-mile radius are reviewed, and at 2:11 a.m., a vehicle matching the same general description is seen moving through an intersection heading east, away from Cedar Hollow. The footage is not clear enough to identify a license plate or driver, but it confirms direction and timing, narrowing the path forward. Investigators begin with the most direct assumption, which is that Maya left her home to meet someone she knew and trusted. At school, her profile does not raise immediate concern. She is not isolated, but she is not highly social either. She exists in a middle space, present, consistent, not disruptive, not attention-seeking. Teachers describe her as quiet, focused, and predictable in a way that does not create obvious warning signs. There are no recent disciplinary issues, no reported conflicts at home, and no visible behavioral changes leading up to that night. Within 48 hours, a name surfaces that aligns with the vehicle seen in the footage. Evan Rourke, 17 years old, attends the same school and drives a dark gray sedan registered under his father's name. He is not closely connected to Maya, but they are familiar with each other through shared environments. When he is interviewed, He acknowledges knowing her, but describes their interaction as limited and casual. He states that he was home that night, and while his parents confirm he was in the house, neither can provide a precise timeline of his movements during the early morning hours. His phone data shows no movement between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m., but the device itself was inactive for most of that time, which means it confirms nothing beyond the location of the phone. His vehicle shows no immediate signs of disturbance, no visible evidence connecting it directly to Maya beyond the general match in appearance, and at this stage, he remains a person of interest rather than a suspect. The investigation holds there briefly before shifting again through Maya's digital footprint. Forensic analysis of her tablet does not recover full conversations, but it does reveal fragments of a recurring contact identifier that had appeared multiple times in the days leading up to her disappearance. The account is not saved under a name, but its presence is consistent, suggesting repeated communication. When that identifier is traced, it leads to someone else entirely. Lucas Hale, 18 years old, with no direct connection to Maya through school or shared social circles, dropped out the previous year. His employment history inconsistent, moving between short-term jobs and periods of inactivity. His digital behavior shows frequent use of temporary messaging platforms, accounts created and deleted, interactions that leave minimal trace. When Lucas is interviewed, he denies knowing Maya, denies using the account, and denies any recent activity that would connect him to her. But a forensic review of his phone reveals that the same application had been installed, actively used, and then removed within the same time window as Maya's last recorded activity. At that point, the investigation no longer follows a single path. It begins to split into two overlapping sequences, one tied to the vehicle that picked her up and one tied to the communication that brought her outside, and both are moving toward the same place. By the time Maya Ellison is found, the investigation has already narrowed into a confined sequence of events that no longer depends on speculation about where she might have gone, but instead focuses on what happened within a very specific window of time and space. The search area on the outskirts of Cedar Hollow had already produced the first physical sign, the torn piece of fabric consistent with the hoodie she was wearing. And when investigators expanded beyond that point, following subtle disturbances in the terrain rather than obvious markers, they reached a drainage culvert partially hidden by overgrowth. Inside that culvert, approximately 80 meters from where the fabric was recovered, Maya Ellison was located. The condition of the scene immediately shaped the direction of the case. There were no wide signs of a prolonged struggle across the surrounding ground, no scattered personal belongings, and no evidence suggesting she had been moved over a long distance. Everything pointed toward a contained event, something that escalated quickly and resolved within a short span of time. The medical examiner later determined the cause of death to be asphyxiation, with no additional trauma consistent with an extended physical assault, reinforcing the conclusion that whatever occurred did not unfold as a chaotic or prolonged attack, but as a focused and controlled action carried out at close proximity. At this stage, both Evan Rourke and Lucas Hale are no longer peripheral figures. Their timelines overlap too precisely, and their proximity to the same location during the same window eliminates the possibility that either of them is irrelevant to what happened. What remains unclear is the division between presence and action, which one of them crossed that line, and at what point the situation shifted from a meeting into something irreversible. Evan is brought in again, this time under conditions that no longer allow for partial explanations. Confronted with the location of Maya's body and the earlier discovery of the fabric, his account shifts further. He admits that he picked her up that night and confirms that the meeting had been arranged in advance. According to his statement, he drove her toward the service road area because she wanted privacy, a place where they could talk without interruption. He describes the initial interaction as normal, but states that the situation became tense shortly after they arrived. He claims there was an argument, though he cannot clearly define what it was about, and that Maya exited the vehicle on her own, moving away from the road and into the darker area beyond the immediate path. He maintains that he did not follow her immediately, that he remained near the vehicle, and that by the time he did move in her direction, he saw someone else already there. That person, he says, was Lucas Hale. According to Evan, Lucas was not part of the original plan, and his presence was unexpected. He describes a brief exchange between Lucas and Maya that escalated quickly, though he avoids specific language about what was said. He claims that he stayed at a distance, uncertain of how to intervene, and that within moments the situation intensified beyond what he anticipated. He He states that he saw physical contact, but could not clearly describe its nature, and that he panicked, choosing to leave the area rather than involve himself further. His account introduces a sequence in which he facilitates Maya's arrival but distances himself from the final act. It also introduces Lucas not just as present, but as central. Lucas, when confronted with this version of events, does not accept it. In his revised statement, he acknowledges that he went to the service road that night, but claims that he arrived after Maya was already there and that the situation he encountered was already in progress. He describes an argument between Maya and Evan, suggesting that tension had built before he became involved. According to his account, the interaction between Maya and Evan had already turned physical, and his involvement was reactive rather than initiating. He claims that he attempted to intervene, that the situation became chaotic, and that any physical contact he had with Maya was not deliberate but part of an attempt to separate them. What neither account can explain cleanly is the absence of evidence supporting a prolonged three-person struggle. The scene does not reflect chaos, it reflects containment. The turning point in the investigation comes from a detail that had initially gone unnoticed during the first search. During a secondary sweep of the area, investigators recover a small metallic clasp belonging to a bracelet Maya was known to wear. The clasp is located several meters away from the culvert, positioned in a way that suggests movement between 2 points rather than a single static location. More importantly, the clasp carries trace DNA. That DNA does not match Evan, it matches Lucas Hale. This detail does not prove intent, but it establishes direct physical contact between Lucas and Maya at a point inconsistent with his statement that his involvement was minimal or reactive. It places him within the sequence not as a peripheral figure, but as someone who was physically engaged during the critical moment. The timeline is reconstructed using all available data. At approximately 2:04 a.m., Maya enters Evan's vehicle. At 2:11 a.m., the vehicle is seen moving east. At 2:19 a.m., it turns onto the service road. Between 2:20 a.m. and approximately 2:34 a.m., all three individuals are within the same area. Evan's device reconnects and begins showing activity shortly after 2:40 a.m., placing him away from the scene. Lucas's device remains in the area for several minutes longer, with minor positional shifts indicating movement rather than immediate departure. The event itself fits within a narrow window, likely less than 10 minutes from escalation to conclusion. There are no calls made during that time, no messages, no recorded audio, only movement, only positioning, only the aftermath. The psychological structure begins to clarify not through confession, but through behavior patterns. Evan's role aligns with facilitation and withdrawal, someone who brings Maya to the location and then removes himself when the situation exceeds his control. Lucas's behavior aligns with escalation and containment, someone who remains in the environment, engages directly, and then attempts to control the outcome after the fact. There is no evidence of premeditated planning involving both individuals together, but there is clear evidence that their independent actions intersected in a way that created a moment neither of them could reverse. Charges are filed accordingly. Lucas Hale is charged with second-degree murder. Evan Rourke is charged as an accessory after the fact, along with obstruction related to his initial false statements. The case proceeds without a full confession. In court, both narratives are presented. Evan maintains that he left before the fatal moment, positioning himself as a witness who chose not to act. Lucas maintains that his involvement was not intentional, framing the incident as a moment that escalated beyond control. The prosecution does not rely on either version entirely. Instead, it builds its case on sequence, on placement, on the physical evidence that cannot be adjusted or reinterpreted. The jury does not receive a single, clean story. They receive overlapping fragments that, when aligned, point consistently in one direction. Lucas Hale is convicted of second-degree murder. He is sentenced to 28 years in prison. Evan Rourke receives 5 years, reduced for cooperation and for his role after the event rather than during it. The house on Cedar Hollow is sold within a year. The camera remains, still mounted in the same position, still angled downward across the driveway. The footage from that night is archived, timestamp intact. 2:03 a.m. The door opens. The girl steps outside. The car is already waiting. The door never fully closes. 6 minutes of footage. 80 meters of distance. 28 years.